All right, let's dive into the world of FDA drug development today. But not just any drug development. We're talking about cannabinoid and psychedelic therapeutics.
Now, this is where things get really interesting.
Absolutely. This is cutting-edge stuff. And honestly, anyone interested in the future of medicine should understand how it all works.
Yeah, we're talking potentially revolutionary treatments.
Yeah.
For things like depression, anxiety, maybe even addiction.
Right. But the journey from the lab to your local pharmacy, well, it's complex.
It is. It really is.
Think of it like an obstacle course with all these checkpoints along the way. We're going to navigate that course together, though.
Okay.
Starting with preclinical research, where the groundwork is laid, all the way to post-marketing surveillance, where the FDA is keeping a watchful eye on drugs that have already been approved.
I like that. That's a great way to visualize it.
Yeah.
And, along the way, we're going to run into some challenges. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Some that are really unique to cannabinoid and psychedelic therapies. I mean, we're not talking about your typical pharmaceuticals here.
Exactly. So the regulatory landscape, it's still evolving.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin? Let's start with those early stages, the foundation, preclinical research. What's happening behind the scenes in those labs?
Well, this is where scientists kind of become detectives, right?
Okay.
Gathering clues about a compound. They want to know, is it safe? Does it actually work?
Right.
So they're conducting lab and animal studies, really looking at how these compounds interact with our bodies at a molecular level.
Hold on. Let's break that down a bit. So we're talking about like tiny molecules, right?
Yeah.
Like THC or psilocybin.
Exactly.
Interacting with receptors in our brains.
Yeah, so you can imagine THC, which is obviously a key player in cannabis. It encounters a CB1 receptor in the brain. It's like a lock and key. When THC binds to that receptor, it triggers all these events, like the release of neurotransmitters, dopamine, for example, which plays a big role in mood and reward.
So it's not just about if a compound binds, it's about how much of it binds.
Yeah.
And then what effects that triggers.
Right, and that's where dosage becomes crucial.
Dosage, okay.
Yeah, researchers spend a lot of time figuring out how different doses of a compound produce different effects, positive and negative. This dose-response relationship, that's key for determining safe and effective therapeutic doses down the line.
So it's like finding that sweet spot.
Yeah.
That Goldilocks zone, where the dose is just right to give you the effect you want, but without the unwanted side effects.
Exactly, yeah. And remember, we're dealing with compounds that can have psychoactive effects. So getting the dose right, it's critical.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's say researchers have promising preclinical data showing a compound might have some real therapeutic potential. What's next? Do they just start testing it on people?
No, not quite. Before any testing on humans can begin, researchers have to submit an application to the FDA. It's called an Investigational New Drug application, or IND for short.
IND, got it.
It's basically a detailed plan outlining their proposed clinical trials. It's got the rationale, the design, safety measures, all of it.
So it's like getting permission to proceed.
Yeah.
They're showing the FDA they've done their homework.
Right.
That the research is scientifically sound, ethically responsible.
Exactly. The FDA then reviews that IND to make sure the risks to people participating in the trials are as low as possible, and that the study design is strong enough to really get some good data.
Okay, so it's a crucial checkpoint in the process to safeguard both scientific integrity and patient safety.
You got it. And if the FDA gives them the green light, then it's on to clinical trials, the heart of drug development. This is where it gets really exciting, because we start to see how these compounds actually work in humans.
Okay, clinical trials. This is where we hear about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Can you break down what happens in each of those phases?
Sure. Think of it as a step-by-step process.
Yeah.
Each phase builds upon the previous one. Phase 1, it's all about safety. They start with a small group of healthy volunteers. They want to see how the drug is metabolized, how well it's tolerated, what side effects might pop up.
So it's like dipping your toe in the water, making sure it's safe before you, dive in head first.
Yeah.
But what if you dip your toe in and there's like unexpected currents?
Right.
How do researchers adapt to unforeseen challenges in phase 1 trials?
Well, that's where the expertise of the research team really comes in. They're always looking at the data for any red flags. If unexpected side effects show up, they might change the dose, or even stop the trial completely to look at the risks again.
So it's a dynamic process, not just a rigid checklist. Flexibility and being responsive are key.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, if phase 1 shows the drug is generally safe, then they move on to phase 2. And now the focus changes to efficacy. Does the drug work? This involves a larger group of participants, and this time it includes people who actually have the condition the drug is meant to treat.
So now we're really starting to see if the drug works, if it can deliver on its therapeutic promise. What kinds of things are they looking for in phase 2?
So they're looking for any indication that the drug is having a good effect. Is it lessening symptoms? Are there improvements in outcomes for the participants? And they're still gathering more data on dosage, what's optimal, and any potential long-term side effects.
So it's like fine-tuning a recipe, in a way, making sure the ingredients are balanced and they're giving you the result you're looking for.
Exactly. And then we get to phase 3.
Okay.
This is the big one. It's the most extensive and rigorous phase of clinical trials. It involves large groups of participants across multiple locations.
Wow.
This gives us the most comprehensive data on the drug's effectiveness, safety, and how it compares to existing treatments.
So this is where they really put it through its paces, to get the evidence to show the FDA it's ready.
Exactly. Phase 3 is kind of the culmination of years of research. It's the final hurdle before seeking that FDA approval.
And if a drug successfully clears all those hurdles, then what? Is it smooth sailing to the pharmacy shelves?
Well, not exactly smooth sailing, but it's definitely a huge step. If the data from those phase 3 trials is convincing, the company submits what's called a new drug application to the FDA.
Okay, an NDA.
Or NDA, yeah.
This is like a pretty massive document.
It is. It's basically everything they've learned about the drug, all compiled.
Wow.
All the preclinical data, clinical trial data, stuff about manufacturing processes, even the proposed labeling for the drug.
So it's like they're presenting their case to the FDA.
Right.
Here's all the evidence. This is why this drug should be approved.
Exactly. And the FDA reviews it all very carefully,
That's
making
true.
sure it meets their standards for safety and efficacy.
So they don't just like rubber stamp it.
Yeah.
They really look closely to make sure the benefits are greater than the risks before giving a drug approval.
Absolutely. It's a thorough process, which is so important to keep the public's trust in medications.
That makes sense. But we're talking about cannabinoids and psychedelics, right?
Yeah.
These aren't just your everyday drugs you can pick up anywhere.
Right.
Does that create any unique challenges for the FDA?
For sure. A lot of cannabinoids and psychedelics are classified as Schedule I substances by the DEA,
Okay.
which means they're seen as having high potential for abuse and no currently accepted medical use.
That seems a little tricky. Like a catch-22. How can you show medical benefit if research is, kind of restricted?
It's a great point. And yeah, it's a challenge researchers are dealing with. The DEA scheduling, it's not always aligned with the latest science. And that creates hurdles for studying these compounds.
So it's not just about the science itself.
Right.
There's this whole legal and regulatory side of things.
Yeah.
What about how the public sees these substances? Does that have any impact?
Oh, absolutely. How society views things, their concerns about safety.
Right.
Those can all influence decisions, even if they aren't based on science.
It's almost like uncharted territory,
It is.
scientifically and culturally. I mean, these therapies, they're making us rethink our ideas about mental health and even consciousness.
That's a great point. It's not just developing new drugs. It's maybe finding whole new ways of understanding the human mind and how it can heal.
Which brings us to another layer of complexity. So unlike typical pharmaceuticals, which often have multiple compounds,
Yeah.
we're dealing with single molecules, like THC or psilocybin.
Right.
Does that pose any challenges from a regulatory perspective?
It does. It really does. Isolating and studying single molecules, it presents unique challenges. We have to understand exactly how they interact with certain receptors and systems in the body.
Right.
And then how those interactions lead to therapeutic effects.
So it's like you're trying to understand this complex machine, like a watch, by looking at a single gear. You need to see how that gear connects to everything else to really get it.
Exactly. And when it comes to dosage, even more critical with single molecules.
Okay.
You have to determine the exact amount needed to get the desired effect without triggering negative side effects.
Finding that sweet spot between efficacy and safety.
Right.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. What happens after a drug is approved by the FDA? Is that the end of the story?
It's not, no. The journey continues with what we call post-marketing surveillance. The FDA is still keeping an eye on the drug, even after it's out there for people to use.
So it's not just a one-time approval and then everyone moves on. There's this ongoing monitoring to make sure the drug is doing what it's supposed to. What does post-marketing surveillance involve?
Well, they're collecting data on long-term effects, looking for any safety issues or interactions that may not have come up during the trials.
Right, because clinical trials can only have a limited number of participants.
Right.
So maybe some rare side effects won't show up until more people are using it.
Exactly, and that's where post-marketing surveillance helps. It can catch those rarer events and make sure the benefits are still outweighing the risks.
So it's like a safety net to protect public health.
It is. It's an essential part of the process. And a crucial role in making sure new therapies, especially those using cannabinoids and psychedelics, are used responsibly and ethically.
All right, so we've gone through the whole FDA drug development process, from preclinical research to post-marketing. We've looked at the specific challenges with cannabinoid and psychedelic therapies and how the FDA tries to balance scientific progress with patient safety. What stands out to you as the most significant takeaway from all of this?
What I find really fascinating is how rigorous this whole process is.
Yeah?
It's demanding, it takes a long time, but it's there for a reason, to make sure these treatments, which could be life-changing, are safe and used responsibly.
It is reassuring to know that those safeguards are there, but now that we have this overview, what about the future? Could personalized medicine be the next step? Tailoring treatments to individual needs?
That's a really interesting question, and researchers are actually looking into that. Imagine maybe one day we can use genetic testing to predict how someone will respond to different cannabinoids or psychedelics, and then create a treatment plan just for them, for maximum effect.
That sounds almost like science fiction.
It does, doesn't it?
But we'll have to see what happens. This field is always changing. So we've covered a lot of ground today, exploring FDA drug development for these cannabinoid and psychedelic therapies.
Yeah, we really have. From those tiny receptors interacting with compounds like THC and psilocybin, all the way to the big picture stuff, clinical trials, post-market surveillance.
It's been quite a journey, and it seems like this field is just moving so fast. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on something we haven't really talked about directly: the societal implications of all of this. If these treatments become widely available, how might they impact our culture?
That's a big question and a really important one. Right now, there's definitely still a stigma around mental health and using certain substances, even in a therapeutic setting. But if these therapies are effective, if they become more accepted, it could really shift how we view mental health altogether and how we treat these conditions.
It's like we're maybe at the beginning of a big change.
Yeah.
Moving away from that model where mental health issues are seen as a problem.
Yeah.
Towards something more holistic, more integrated.
Yeah, exactly. These therapies have the potential to change not just how we treat mental health conditions, but how we understand the mind and how it can heal, how it can transform.
What really intrigues me is the potential impact on how we view addiction. Traditionally, it's been seen as a moral failing.
Right.
But new research is suggesting that psychedelics, like psilocybin, could help people break free from those really ingrained behaviors.
It really is a radical shift in how we think about it. Imagine a world where addiction is treated with compassion, where the focus is on healing the underlying trauma, the mental health issues that often contribute to substance abuse in the first place.
It's a powerful thought, and it highlights just how profound these therapies could be. We're not just talking about treating symptoms, we're talking about changing lives, and maybe even reshaping how society understands some of these really challenging human experiences.
And it's important to remember, these therapies are still in those early stages of development. We have a lot more to learn, but the potential benefits are so big, it's critical to keep exploring, keep pushing those boundaries.
I completely agree. And as these therapies go through the FDA process, it would be fascinating to see how they shape the future of medicine, but also how they shape our understanding of things like mental health, consciousness, even the potential for healing.
It really is an exciting time to be following this field. I'm eager to see what's next.
Me too. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into FDA drug development for cannabinoid and psychedelic therapeutics. We hope you've learned something today, and maybe have a better understanding of this complex and promising new field.
This is really just the start of the conversation. Stay curious, keep those questions coming, and be part of shaping the future of medicine.
Absolutely. Until next time, stay informed and keep exploring.